Greetings and salutations. Welcome to a long delayed Tools Day. Today we're going to talk about welding. Stick around. So over the last couple of years I've had some commenters ask me if I would do a welding tutorial. And that sounds like a great idea, except for a couple of things. Number one, I'm not a certified welder. Number two, I'm not a teacher. If I can weld, anybody can weld, and that's just a fact. Let me just give you some backstory on how I became an adequate welder. Like I mentioned, I never received any professional training, any vocational training outside of a couple of years in high school in our metal shop program. And that was back in the early to mid 80s. And our school did not have the budget for expensive machines like MIG and TIG. And back in the 80s, it was still pretty expensive and large, bulky equipment, MIG and TIG. So the only real training that I received was in stick welding. And I'd already been stick welding by that time for 5 years. I learned to stick weld when I was 12. I asked my uncle on the farm. I asked him, I said, "Can you teach me how to weld?" And he said, "Sure, come on over here." And he walked me over to an old Lincoln tombstone welder that was probably at that time 20 years old, probably made in the 50s. And he said, "Well, this is the welder. This is how you turn it on. You hook this thing to whatever you're welding on, and you put a piece of welding rod in this thing, and then you strike an arc and create a puddle and start welding. Here you go." And that's how I learned how to weld. I learned by doing. Nobody sat me down and taught me about the fundamentals and the principles of different welding processes and the chemical composition of some of the fluxes and the different alloys that are used in the different types of welding rod. I had a box of rod, I had a bucket full of bolts and spark plugs, and time. And I started melting pieces of metal together with electricity. For a 12-year-old, that was the coolest thing since sliced bread. That's the extent of my training. I learned how to MIG weld by buying a MIG welder and, just kind of going to town on it. Most of you that are going to be interested in this video are going to be kind of like hobbyists, people who have a little shop in their garage or something and they just want to buy an inexpensive welder and get started, right? There's different welding processes and different machines that you can buy for the home welder, for the hobbyist welder. The cost of entry is kind of in an ascending order. So let's just start with probably the most basic and fundamental electric arc welding type process, and that's stick welding. Like I said, I learned on an old tombstone, and they still make those old DC arc welders. They're around about $500. I'm a Lincoln guy, if you can't tell. I have Lincoln equipment, and I've always owned Lincoln equipment. I had a used arc welder I bought from Martinville way back in the day when I first met him that I used for a while, and I got rid of it because I got this TIG machine which also does stick. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do with a welder? It's really going to determine what kind of machine you're going to buy, what welding process you're going to use. So let's talk about the different processes. If you're anything like me, back when I was just a little kid, and I saw people welding, I looked at that as kind of a black art. It was cool to watch, and they told me all the obligatory things like don't watch it with your naked eye, you'll go blind. And don't breathe the smoke, it's bad for you. It's good advice, by the way. On our little dirt farm in West Michigan, we only had an arc welder, and we used it for everything. So that process is the most basic of short circuit arc welding processes. It has an acronym. The acronym is SMAW, and that stands for shielded metal arc welding. The consumable bit of that is a welding rod that has flux on it. That is a piece of welding rod. The welding rod is also known as the electrode. This is I call it a stinger, but the proper term is electrode holder. And you open up the jaws like that, and you put the welding rod in, and then you strike an arc. I'm not going to do it here, but basically you take and strike an arc just by touching the metal with the electrode, and that creates a short circuit. And the object is to create a puddle of molten metal along the joint that you're trying to weld, and you work in little circles or little zigzags or back and forth motion to fill that gap, that fillet, if you will, with welding rod. And what you're doing is you're melting the parent metal along with the consumable filler material to create the weld. And the weld, if it's done properly, is much stronger than the parent metal or the two pieces of metal that you're welding together. If you take and you stress that weld to failure, the parent metal will break before the weld will. This is a process that was developed in the early 1800s, believe it or not. It wasn't perfected until the turn of the last century. It's been used in industry forever. And it's the least expensive process to get into. Like I said, you can buy a DC welder, just a regular DC welder, for around $500 from Home Depot. They still make them and sell them all the time. And this works great if you're doing anything over, say, 1/8 of an inch. The disadvantage of an arc welder is that it requires 220 volts to operate. So in most garages, you don't have a 220 outlet. So you're going to have to hire an electrician, or if you're capable of doing it yourself, run wire and put in a 220 volt circuit in your garage to be able to plug your arc welder into. A welding rod for mild steel is relatively inexpensive. This is 6013. I've used 6013 and 7018. If you're going to weld like sheet metal, or you're going to work on your car, like a car body, and do body work, then you don't want to use an arc welder, because there's no real way that you can control the bead. And anytime with an arc welder, you want to strike an arc and hold that arc for as long as you can without stopping, because as soon as you stop, that the flux on the outside of here, as it burns, it creates a slag that covers the metal and protects it from oxygen while it cools. And then you have to go in after the fact and chip that slag off, and it's like glass. It's really brittle, and you knock it off with a hammer. And if it's done right, it'll just fall right off. As the puddle cools and shrinks a little bit, the slag will come right off. The disadvantage of this kind of process is it's very dirty. It's very smoky, and you don't want to do it in a confined space. You want to have proper ventilation. That's one of the downsides. The upside is you can do it anywhere. You can do this outside. You can do it in the wind. As long as you can strike an arc and keep a puddle, this is pretty idiot-proof. It's the preferred method of welding for farmers everywhere. The next process I want to talk about is MIG welding. Its standardized acronym is GMAW, gas metal arc welding, or MIG, metal inert gas. This is my MIG welder. It's a Power MIG 215. Yeah, there it is. Power MIG 215. I believe I bought this one 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. And I bought this one because it was on sale, and I bought it because my Weld Pack 100, after a decade of loyal service, had gone kaput, and I needed a welder. I paid about $1,400 for this one, and that's not a bad price for a machine of this size. So in retrospect, if I had to do it all over again, I would not buy this. This is way too much welder for what I'm doing. I would still get a 220 welder, but I would get a smaller one. It's a little more manageable. This one weighs, 300 pounds or whatever. It's not very portable. It's huge. And then this is a transformer-based machine, whereas a lot of the newer modern welders are inverter-based machines. Same thing with that TIG welder. I bought this one because I wanted to weld aluminum. You have to have an AC/DC welder to weld aluminum. You have to weld on AC. This one weighs a shit ton too. So again, this is a transformer-based machine, and there's not a lot of adjustability. The thing I like about both of these machines is their simplicity. There's not a lot of features. There's not a lot to break. There's not a lot of electronics to go bad. This is pretty simple in terms of setup. You got DC negative, alternating current, DC positive. You got your amperage setting here. When you're operating in TIG, you set your maximum, and then you use the foot pedal to increase the amperage. So that allows you some control over the heat. On stick, you just You set your amperage and you just, go to town. It's a pretty simple machine. I didn't know how to TIG weld when I bought this machine at all. I'd never TIGged a day in my life when I bought this machine. Multi-process machines. I don't have any personal experience with multi-process machines. There are machines on the market, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. A lot of them coming over from China, a lot of imports that do MIG, stick, and TIG. They do all three processes. And based on what I've read and what I've seen a lot of YouTube videos about those multi-process machines, is that they'll do all three processes, but they don't do any one process great. The great thing about this square wave TIG is that it does both processes pretty good. If you're going to take on TIG welding, it's a skill that not too many people have mastered. I certainly haven't. I have owned that machine since 2004. But when it comes to any equipment that you buy, whether it's a MIG or a TIG, the important thing to look at is the consumables, the pieces that are going to wear out. For instance, the tips. This isn't a tip that came with this machine. I had to replace it. But make sure that the disadvantage to a lot of these import machines is that you can get into them cheap, but the consumables are impossible to find. A lot of guys that buy cheap Chinese plasma cutters find out the hard way that their $500 plasma cutter isn't worth tinker's damn once you burn up the consumables and you can't find replacements. Then you're replacing the torch, and now you're at by the time you replace the torch and all that crap, you're at the cost of a good plasma cutter. So take that in consideration. Personally, when it comes to welders, like I said, I'm a Lincoln guy. That's what I'm going to recommend. Personal protection equipment. Welding in short sleeves is a bad idea. Welding in short pants is a bad idea as well. However, most of what I do is above the waist, so I get away with it. But welding with short sleeves is a no-no. And for stick welding and MIG welding, a pair of heavy welder's gloves is, at the bare minimum, the least you should be buying to protect yourself. And if you live in a climate like I live in, and it's really hot, and you don't want to wear a leather welding jacket or a treated canvas welding jacket, then you need to get some sleeves, like so. And that will protect your arms from UV light. And if you've watched like American Chopper and all those other fab channels back in the late 90s, early 2000s, you saw those guys out there getting down in a position, getting their stuff lined up, and then closing their eyes like tack. Yeah, you're asking for skin cancer, buddy. and let me tell you, flash burn hurts a lot worse than sunburn, and it doesn't tan, it just flakes off. So you want to have some sleeves and some gloves. Not only will these protect you from slag and sparks, but a lot of times you got to hold something and tack it together. This will protect you from the heat. And a welding helmet. I have an auto darkening helmet. This one is from Harbor Freight, and they run about $50. If you don't have a huge budget, because some of these auto darkening helmets can run into the hundreds of dollars, and I found that Harbor Freight is probably the best value for your money. Let me fire up the arc welder and see if we can do anything with it. So in this case, I have the foot pedal plugged in here. I don't have to do anything with this at the moment, but the electrode holder in this case is the TIG torch. And pull this out, take the stinger, plug this in, turn it. Got a switch here, flip it from TIG to stick. I don't know if you can see that. I suspect you couldn't. A little too hot, actually. See how that slag chips off there? That's better. All right, let's look at the MIG. Most MIG machines will have this feature. If you open up the door where the wire goes, you'll have this chart here, and this is your suggested welding setting. So I'm using what, 35 thousandths wire, 35 thousandths wire, and 1/4 inch steel, 280 to 320 feet or inches per minute on setting D or E. So I'm going to put this on setting D at about 280. Here, I'm about 250. 280. Let's put it right a little above 280 on setting D. We'll turn that on. And then, very important, don't forget to turn your gas on. I have this thing set at whatever that says. That's where the flow rate's set. So let's set it up, and I'll put a weld here. Techie techie. Did you hear the difference in those welds? The first one, when I welded on the back side here, didn't sound too bad. But as you can see, I don't know if you can tell or not enough heat. It looks like somebody laid a bugger on there. It wasn't hot enough. Wire setting was pretty good, but it wasn't hot enough. Then over here, same thing. Wasn't hot enough. And it was kind of spittering and spattering. So I turned the wire feed up a little bit to think just about 300 inches per minute. And it was better, but it really smoothed out when I turned the heat up to the E setting. Now, you notice the temperature settings here are incremental. They're not infinite. So it's kind of hard to dial in a temperature. But that's the sound that you're looking for. The sound that it's kind of like frying bacon. That's the sound you're looking for when you're welding MIG. If I were going to make recommendations and take it for what it's worth, like I said, I'm not a certified welder, never have been. But if I were going to recommend a welding machine for a home hobbyist, and they didn't want to do any extra wiring in the house to bring in a 220 volt circuit into the garage, then get one of them entry-level Lincolns. They come pretty much set up. All you need is a bottle, and you really don't even need a bottle to start welding, because they come with a 1-pound roll of mild steel wire for welding MIG, and it also comes with a inner core wire for welding without gas. The difference between the two, you might ask, is, well, inner core welding wire has a flux in the core of the wire, and it doesn't require shielding gas to weld. Great option if you got a small machine and you're using it outdoors. Use inner core wire, because you don't need to worry about the wind blowing away your shielding gas. The downside is it's dirty, and it's a lot like arc welding, where it creates slag to protect the weld, and you have to chip that off after the fact. There's a little more finishing involved. There's a lot more welding spatter, blah blah blah. If you don't have the money to go to vocational school, get a job in a union someplace where they have an apprenticeship program and take their training. You can learn on the job. But right now there's a shortage of welders, especially in the trades, and welders make a pretty good amount of money. But like I said, if you're just a regular Joe that wants to weld a little bit in his garage, then check the links in the description. It'll take you to some Amazon affiliate links. You can, and if you decide you want to buy one of those machines, then you're helping to support this channel financially, because I get a little bit of a commission off anything you buy off Amazon through those links. So if you're going to buy anything, go through one of those links, please. I need all the help I can get. So in a nutshell, I can't really teach you how to weld without you being here, but I just showed you a couple basic welds. Those aren't my greatest welds, but those welds, I have confidence that those will hold. They might not pass any kind of testing for, working in the nuclear field or whatever, and that's the stick weld. If you have an interest in welding, the best advice I can tell you is get information from as many sources as you can. YouTube's a great source for learning how to weld. There's welding tips and tricks. That's a channel that I follow to learn a little bit about TIG techniques. And that guy's a professional welder. I think he's even an instructor. Yeah, but the best advice I can say is get out there, buy a machine, decide what kind of welding you want to do, buy the machine, and then start welding. It's a lot of fun. It's therapeutic to melt metal with electricity. That's all I got today. If you liked this video and you found it informative, hammer away the like button. If it was a complete waste of your time, I'm sorry, that was not my intention. Hammer away at the dislike button. Either way is okay with me. Share this video if you liked it with your vast social media network. Oh, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. And until next time, you have fun, stay safe, shoot straight, keep your powder dry, and have a splendid day. Thanks for watching. I love you, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Oh, I managed to do that all on one battery. Oh.